I used to be a loser. Whether or not I deserved this label didn't matter to me, a self-loathing 11-year-old. I was quiet, shy, and overall unsure of myself. My home life was bland. Every day would be a mix of the previous. I would go home, play video games for 4 to 5 hours, get yelled at by mom for spending so much time online, and go to bed. Middle school is when social hierarchies start to form. It's when some kids, seemingly at random, become popular, and others kind of weird. My lack of confidence placed me somewhere in the latter category. I related a lot more to online people than the people in my daily life, and I spent a lot of time online. This was back in 2016. Back then, most of the online spaces that I inhabited were laced with a form of politics. A lot of my favorite YouTubers indulged in edgy humor, which strayed the lines of socially acceptable and unacceptable. They used homophobic jokes and racist jokes and had a lot of anti-feminist content. This would be the breeding ground for more problematic ideas later on. The following year, I discovered self-help. I started reading, meditating, and other beneficial habits. I felt slightly better. I thought self-help would rejuvenate myself. I thought it would bring me confidence. I was wrong to an extent, though. The following year, I discovered the concept of the alpha male off the internet. According to the internet, an alpha male is a man at the top of the dominance hierarchy who displays aggression and is loud towards his peers. And because of his domineering stature on the dominance hierarchy, I guess, you could say that he got all the attention from the females. In contrast to the alpha male, there's a beta. The beta is someone who is quiet, timid, submissive, and overall kind of a loser. He also doesn't get much attention from the females. I wish at this point in my life I could say I was the alpha, but sadly, I related a lot more to the beta male. I wanted to go through self-help to maybe one day become the alpha, maybe one day embody this kind of personhood. What's funny is that the following year after entering high school, I became somewhat well known among my grade, to where my previous self would think of me as the alpha maybe. I was still incredibly insecure though. My main gripe was that I didn't talk to girls. During these years, I spent a lot of time on a space in the internet known as the manosphere, which is characterized by male content creators making content for their primarily male audience, which ranges from preteens to young adults, and centers around male topics like dating or working out. On all of these channels I consumed, there was a massive amount of attention awarded to female validation. It was as if getting a girl was an indicator to how masculine you were, and if you didn't get one, then you were kind of a loser. The manosphere is an interesting place. They have sometimes helpful ideas, but a lot of times kind of weird ideas regarding society as a whole. Take, for example, one of my favorite YouTubers back then, Hamza. He had interesting ideas that helped me regarding mental health and loneliness, but he also had some weird ideas, to say the least. One of which was the sexual marketplace, which basically summed up is the idea that someone's value, what they bring as a person to a relationship, is summed up only in four traits, which were looks, money, status, and game. It renders something that was profound, that was love, into a mere cold calculation of value. I buy a car because I know it has a certain fuel efficiency, but I don't choose to marry and spend the rest of my life with someone simply because they have a 7 in status. Also, according to this chart in this video, the sexual market value of a woman only ever decreases as her potential for fertility decreases. These ideas made no sense to most people, but to a boy who had come out of quarantine without having much experience with relationships and dating, they simplified this complex and scary world for me. And this is where the power of manosphere content lies. They appeal to your insecurities, give you a microdose of misogyny, all the while reinforcing your previous insecurities and making you primed to alt-right ideas. For example, a boy who is dealing with social anxiety might discover another video and about how girls really want him to talk to them. And one thing leads to another, and eventually that same boy is wondering why he's getting no success. And eventually, he thinks he has no hope for finding love because of his sub-5 looks. I was close to becoming one of these people. Back at the start of 2022, I was rejected by my crush. I felt crushed, which is kind of a bad joke. For some, rejection is easy. They can walk off feeling like a heavy load has been lifted off their shoulders, feeling like they've finally done something that that freed them, I guess. But for me, it was something else. I wondered why I felt so weird, so awkward. It felt like the charismatic part of my identity had been stripped of me. And I would just stare at the ceiling and listen to emo music. I would journal a lot in my diary, writing some cringeworthy lines that are beyond the scope of this talk. Once again, feeling insecure, I found myself on the internet. And once again, on the internet, I found myself looking at manosphere content. Because it seemed like they were the only space where people were talking about these issues. It seemed like only they could see the kind of pain I was going through. So I started reading guides on game and seduction, which is really cringe, and I kind of regret doing it, but hear me out. So normally, if someone were to tell you that they were trying to fix previous patterns by applying what they learned online or from a book, you would think that they're doing something productive until you realize that I was reading a guide that was likening getting a girlfriend to hunting down a gazelle in the savannah. I was addicted. And I kept reinforcing the worldview that the reason why I got rejected was simply because I wasn't masculine enough. And had I been the alpha male, had I been masculine to a certain extent, I would never have to deal with this emotion. I would never have to deal with this kind of pain. So I kept going deeper. I wanted to fill the void. I wanted to find these strategies, these things that would give me the leg up in this kind of video game of dating. I wanted to find the red pill. It felt like this was objective. They were using statistics and they were using science, it seemed. But I realized something. I noticed that a lot of their arguments were pinned using evolutionary psychology. And I remembered a conversation with my sister I had about a year prior on how evolutionary explanations are commonly used to defend sexism. I started to notice a few holes in my theory. I told my sister about the situation, and she gave me a list of resources to check out. I read books by feminist authors and looked into gender theory, and I noticed a lot of their ideas were diametrically opposed to the rhetoric coming out of the manosphere. On both sides, however, they were trying to define what it meant to be a man in the 21st century. Masculinity was in a phase of redefinition. According to the manosphere content creators, the former strong values of masculinity were being eroded in favor of weak, soft, castrated forms of it by the feminists. I got a different idea from actually reading feminist authors, though. If we tried to understand why historically a society would create a concept like masculinity, we'd realize that, according to author William Petit, a man is only useful if he's willing to die for his country. And that countries with more men willingly sacrificing themselves in violent wars would end up winning against the other ones. Their culture would be ours to inherit simply because they conquered the other countries. Similar to how we've inherited English as a language and Eurocentrism as a way of viewing the world, simply because the English and the Europeans have conquered most of it. I realized that this form of masculinity was something that we inherited and was kind of archaic. How could something be truly worth striving for if it was arbitrarily created to serve armies? I realized I had no reason to pledge allegiance to masculinity, and that furthermore, I wanted to explore more of who I was as a person, rather than simply a number on a scale indicating how alpha I was. According to author Bell Hooks, patriarchy demands of all males that they engage in acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they kill off the emotional parts of themselves. As young boys, we're told not to show any emotion, except for maybe anger or happiness. This emotional suppression and neglect causes a lot of psychological baggage in men and makes it so it's difficult to deal with hard emotions later on. And if a boy is unable to suppress his emotions, if he continues to cry, then he's called a freak, a wimp, a girl. It's not working. Whatever, it's fine. Where was I? The need to be strong results in an inability to deal with emotions that are deemed weak by society. And because men are not told or not taught to deal with these emotions, it makes it difficult to create real male friendships. For the males in the crowd, when was the last time you were truly vulnerable around one of your male friends? Or when was the last time you said you loved one of them? This is also why, for a lot of men, it seems so important to develop a romantic or a sexual relationship, because it's the only time in society where men are allowed to be vulnerable around someone else without having to feel weak, without having to feel ashamed. So in Europe, out of 5 suicide victims, 4 of them are going to be men. This is also because men typically have weaker social ties, they have weaker friendships, and some don't even have romantic relationships. The rise of incels highlights a direct correlation between our society's values of masculinity and the real-world violence that they cause. Incels, or involuntary celibates, are men who have been rejected by females romantically and thus have developed nihilistic and misogynistic attitudes towards the world. There's been a tremendous rise in incel-related violence. In 2014, a man, Elliot Rodger, committed a shooting at a California college. He wrote a 100,000-word manifesto regarding his hateful beliefs towards women and other minority groups. And in 2018, in Toronto, there was a van attack where one man, Alec Manassian, ran over multiple people, eventually killing 10 of them. Alex said he wanted to start a beta uprising. He wanted the beta males that I previously mentioned at the bottom of the social hierarchy to begin enacting violence towards society as a whole. The hierarchy that Alex thought he was at the bottom of was one that was created by masculinity. And the existence of incels highlights the desperation with which some men strive to embody certain forms of masculinity, most notably the need for female validation. Judith Butler's theory of gender performativity says that gender, rather than being a fixed thing, is more like something that's created through our daily actions. Gender is like a performance. It's like we are actors on a stage performing what has been societally defined as our gender. I'm playing the role of what is male. And like how a performer can choose whether or not they want to perform on a given day, we can choose whether or not we want to try to be the alpha male in a situation or if we want to do something else. This is rejuvenation and liberation. Failure to perform masculinity brings a lot of men to incel-related ideas. And I now notice that much of my self-help journey, though granting me a lot of confidence, was really about better performing. It was about this performance becoming the alpha male. The problem arises when the very reason why someone feels insecure and thus looks at self-help is the task of performing masculinity. But the only thing you want to do is perform it to a better extent. When the thing that's causing you pain is the thing that you grip onto the hardest, that's when your mental health deteriorates. Gender is always a performance, and we can always choose what model we want to perform, or if we want to perform at all. For example, I didn't have to feel like a part of my masculinity was stripped of me after I got rejected. In fact, this was just a normal phase of my life. The problem with manosphere content creators is that they take these normal phases of your life and present them as reasons why you are inherently lacking in some way. And they make fun of people like you. They hammer home against your insecurities and use them as proof that you will never be masculine unless you do what they listen to you, unless you do what they tell you to do. Maybe they try to sell you a course like Andrew Tate, or maybe they do something more sinister. This is de-radicalization pipeline for many men, and it's why almost all incels or speed shooters are male. They lure you in with edgy humor, but as you deal with aspects of the male experience, stories of rejection, trauma, bullying, you fall down a cliff. And before you realize it, the other side has been painted as zesty soy boys or sensitive snowflakes, and you find there's no reason to listen to them. My proposal for you is to reject these attempts at manipulation. It's to realize that you are strong despite whatever hardship you are going through, and that gender is always a performance that you can choose whether or not you want to engage in, or if you want to perform this kind of model of masculinity. Redefining masculinity is a process that men should engage in the 21st century. We've been given the theoretical scaffolding by gender theorists, but it's only men with real lived experiences who can go on to model masculinity in positive ways. And it is something that is necessary right now. Far too many men are dying of suicide, dealing with loneliness, or struggling with poor mental health simply due to the societal prescriptions of manhood. I hope through this talk you've realized how rigid and toxic values of masculinity fail to help you, and instead look towards redefining masculinity, as some people are kind of doing already. Musicians like Bad Bunny, Tyler the Creator, and Harry Styles are kind of working at it. Redefining masculinity will be difficult as we don't know where we're going. We don't have a map to what it'll look like. But like I mentioned before, it is necessary. So I hope you join me in this process of redefining masculinity in the 21st century. And maybe the next time I or you get rejected, we don't have to go about questioning our inherent value as men or as humans. Thank you.